Good afternoon and welcome to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Angelica Spanos. Thanks so much for joining us today. We have a busy day on the network. All right, wow, interesting things that we just heard from the Texas Ranger. And again, he investigated the shooting and also the locks in this case. That's David Armstrong. He's been on the stand for several hours today. Joseph Scott Morgan, forensic death investigator, with me today to break this all down. Joseph, hello.
Hello, Angelica. How are you?
I'm great. I want to ask you a question because what we just saw is we saw a photo of Amber's keys inside Botham Jean's door, his locked door. This is interesting, and this is something we haven't seen before. What do you think of that?
I think that it is interesting in that it at least gives one the impression that she might have a perception that she can enter this dwelling with her own key, and that's kind of in stark contrast to some of the things that we've been hearing. It's we associate a key as a methodology to access things or to get passage into a protected area. And so once that's down, the perception comes into play. Is this actually my environment? So I think that there's a lot to that.
Right. This gives us some new insight that maybe, yes, there's all these other things that indicated it wasn't her apartment, but her key went into the door. All right, so we've been listening to Kristen Noble, and she is a forensic digital analyst for the Dallas District Attorney's Office. And so far, she's confirmed that the times that were recorded off the DVR in the garage are correct. Joseph, bringing in this whole element of this video and this surveillance, if you will, footage, how does that play into this? Obviously, it's going to help build this timeline of when these folks got home, but why is this important?
Well, it's important, Angelica, because this simple reason. This provides numerical support for the jury. It's kind of like if you think about the how solid DNA evidence is. I'm not saying that that's quite the same, but when you have quantitative findings where you can actually marry numbers up to things, it creates this fantastic foundation at a perception level for the jury. So, moving forward, that's key. That's key to this case for the prosecution. That's why this is so incredibly important. Plus, it's something that they can actually see. It's tangible. You're not talking about some kind of abstract concept that's done somewhere in a laboratory.
All right. And Joseph, let's backtrack for a second, because as the show began, we saw the last witness and we saw those photos of the gun shell casings in the apartment. We saw where they were marked on the floor and those details. This it was something we hadn't seen before. We didn't see those pictures. What do you think of that new evidence we saw?
Well, it gives you kind of a spatial context. And that's about all you can take from it. I reflect back to what Ranger Armstrong was saying while he was on the stand. And what's so important about this is the fact that, when you're talking about, say, for instance, brass, which this is referred to as spent brass casings, when it hits a solid surface, and he pointed this out, it's unpredictable as far as where these things are going to come to rest. So you can't really interpret movement or even range of fire or relationship between the end of the muzzle of the weapon and, of course, the ending target, which was Mr. Jean. So that's important for everyone to understand. It does give you an indication that something happened in approximating that particular area. What's more important here, though, is when we finally kind of dig into all of this data relative to the projectiles that were recovered that came from those casings out of the end of the barrel of the weapon and that struck his body, that's going to be key.
And let's talk a little bit about the forensics with this case. Do you think this case is going to be about the forensics, or do you think this is more about the law here?
I think that this lists more toward law. The forensics will kind of frame things, and let me tell you, to the extent, in my opinion at least, how much the forensics will frame this. We're going to talk about, say, for instance, we're going to hear about range of fire. We're going to hear about this kind of the angle, the trajectory of the rounds. This will give us kind of a relationship. Was Mr. Jean upright? Was he in a slumped position, that sort of thing? And we'll hear details about that. The range of fire is going to be crucial too. Was there any kind of firing residue that was left behind on his remains or on his clothing that gives us an indication of the spread of the powder, the unburned powder, or is it absent? Because that gives us a distance estimation at that point in time. And it's very dynamic, but if they can paint this accordingly, and I understand that a crime scene reconstructionist might appear, and this is, let me tell you something, our viewers are going to love to see this when this happens, because they'll probably do a 3D animation, I would imagine.
We are going to have to take a break right now, but when we come back, we'll be back in Amber Guyger's trial live.